Now, sanctions are sold as targeted diplomatic pressure, but on the ground, they often choke hospitals, disrupt markets, and shut people out of the global exchange of, likes of medicine, education, and culture. Effectively, a kind of civilizational warfare that punishes society more than the leaders it's supposed to hit. Now, we see it from Niger to Syria and Zimbabwe, where everyday life frays while elites stay insulated and the promised political fixes rarely materialize. Now, across Africa, governments are pushing back. They're freezing exports, tightening mineral rules, and leaning on regional diplomacy, trying to keep value at home and also protect sovereignty. But those moves come with trade-offs because they might safeguard resources, yet they can also deepen shortages, spur smuggling, or even scare off investors. The urgent question is whether we can find African-led paths that stop violence without making ordinary people pay the price. Today on The Conversation, I am joined by Dr. David Matsanga, African Affairs Analyst, and Professor Daniel Kipo-Sunyehzi, Senior Research Fellow at Legon Centre for International Affairs and Diplomacy, University of Ghana. Thank you so much for joining us, gentlemen.
Thank you very much for inviting us.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you.
So let me begin with Dr. Matsanga here. We know that sanctions have been called a form of civilizational warfare. Tell us, do you agree with this, and what does that mean in practical terms for ordinary people and not just governments?
There is nothing in sanctions that civilizes anybody. Sanctions kill people. Sanctions hurt the masses. Sanctions, whether targeted or overall sanctions, hurt the people. In fact, in places where sanctions have been put on individuals, Zimbabwe, for example, I have been struggling for that for 24 years. It has hurt the masses, the hospital, the schools, the roads, the infrastructure. So when you are saying you are putting sanctions on leaders, targeting leaders, still these leaders are the ones that go outside to find investment for the country. You take off investment, you threaten investors from coming to countries. Sanctions in the third world don't change governments, but hurt masses. I've never seen a government that has been overthrown because sanctions have been put on their leaders. I've not seen. Zimbabwe, Mugabe survived until he was taken out by his own party. Mnangagwa is surviving. The same happens to several other people. Places in Africa, Libya survived the sanctions. These sanctions hurt masses. There is nothing like a civilization in sanctions. It is a tool used by Western. We don't understand what we are supposed to say, what we are supposed to do at any time. We are all the time, not united to hit back. We are not united to say with one voice. Each country goes for its own interest. So there is no civilization there, my sister.
Oh, okay. Now let's hear from Professor Kipo-Sunyehzi. What are your thoughts on this, and who actually pays the real costs? Can you even put numbers on it?
As I agree perfectly with my colleague, what he has said. Sanctions, I actually do not see how sanctions can be connected to act of civilization. They are just punitive measures against poorer or countries of the global south. Most of the time, these are sanctions that are carried out to the countries of the global south, and Africa is part of that. And so most of the time, I think that they will claim that the sanctions are targeting the political elites, but in reality, it's the masses that suffer the sanctions. And in most cases, these sanctions really do not make any headway, apart from just putting a lot of hardship on the people. And Africa as a continent, as my colleague rightly put it, we need Africa as we have a global that Africa will become a global influencer. And I believe that that is the way forward for us. We need to be united. Our founding fathers from the 1960s, 1950s, have that vision that Africa must be united. Because we are not united, that is why all these things are happening. Because an attack, a sanction that is put on Niger, Ghana might think that Ghana is not suffering. Sanctions that are put in Zimbabwe, Ghana might think that, oh, we are not there. But all these 54 African states, if we come together and say that we are resisting the sanctions that are put in Zimbabwe, that will be the way of Africa being able to speak to the forces, to speak to the global north. Hey, we are not going to agree. This thing, it won't work. This thing, it won't work. And that is how we'll be able to save ourselves. But when sanctions are imposed on one country and we all remain quiet, then Nigerians will suffer it. And it's not only Nigeria that will suffer, the neighboring country may also fare the same thing. And I think that we need a united continent with a united voice. African Union must not let us down. It might be a global continental power that will be able to stand up to all this and urge all the member states that let's rise up against the sanctions that are imposed on this country. Because the political elite may not be the only one who suffer. It is the masses that suffer, not the elite.
Absolutely.
And Africa must stand up.
Now, I asked, who pays the real cost? Because, for instance, Sudan's war has displaced millions. That's roughly 12 million. And also left tens of millions needing help. So, Dr. Matsanga, how much of that distress is down to some of these sanctions? And how much is to the fighting in these countries itself? Dr. Matsanga, can you unmute?
Sorry about that. You can't isolate the fighting forces when you are the same one supplying arms to one of the sides. America supplies arms to the Sudanese armed forces. They do this, and then they go to say they are putting sanctions on RSF. They don't want people to rearrange RSF. They don't want people to tell RSF sit down in Kenya, in Uganda, anywhere. It's double standards. You cannot, and let's be very honest, and stand firm. As my brother has said, it is African Union that has let us down. The war in Sudan is partly the problem of America. The war in Sudan is partly the difficulties of the West. France and America have been involved. You know that in Libya, southern Libya, there are 30,000 troops commanded by General Khalifa Haftar, an American ally, French ally, who has cut off Libya, who supplies arms to every group that wants to overthrow governments in that region. So for me, I feel the war in Sudan, even if you put sanctions on the warring parties, it is up to us Africans. Let's sit down and call these generals. Some of us who know them from 1994, when some people were not there, when Mr. Trump was still eating his money. We know generals, the two of them. We need to talk to them and turn them down, not to divide Sudan, come together and sit down on the table. Sanctions will not help. Sanctions will only make matters worse when the same America are supplying arms, the same America are getting in Jeddah, telling Saudi Arabia to arrange the other side and threatening anybody who tries to reorganize RSF. That's what they have done. They have done everything. Like in this country here, they supported Yahya Jammeh. They put sanctions on Yahya Jammeh. But Yahya Jammeh was not thrown by sanctions. Yahya Jammeh in this country was thrown out by people themselves. Some of us who helped to get Mr. Yahya Jammeh out, not sanctions. Sanctions are the most obnoxious tools that should not be allowed in Africa. And the African Union must pull up its socks, stop, talk with one voice. That is my dream.
So now, speaking of Africa, Professor Kipo-Sunyehzi, do sanctions ever work fast enough to change, for example, a junta's calculus? Because we know that Niger's sanctions did not quickly restore the ousted president. So what evidence do these policymakers point towards or point to that these sanctions actually work?
Oh, sanctions, actually, they don't work. Sanctions, I think it is just the power of the global north against the global south. And it is just a political tool. At any point, they can just impose them on us. But in most cases, they worsen the situation. And I always think that all these things are happening. That is what we all say. Africa as a continent is a powerful continent. In terms of our numbers, 54 countries, we need to be united. And when one country comes under sanctions, then the whole African Union will stand up and say that these sanctions, we reject them, and we also begin to trigger the processes, letting this global north know that we are going to do A, B, C, D, and all the member states will come together. And then you realize that the sanctions wouldn't work. Gradually, we'll get to a point that the issue of imposing sanctions on our leaders, imposing sanctions on our minerals, and putting sanctions on our travel restrictions, and all these things, they will put an end to it. If we are united and we speak with one voice, Africa, we will overcome all these things. It has nothing to do with civilization. It's just a bullying tactics of the global north against the global south, of which Africa, we are part of the many that are suffering these sanctions, which in most cases don't make sense at all.
Well, the big question is Africa even ready? Do they have the infrastructure? Because let's take, for example, the economic ban on Zimbabwe, right? The tariffs on it. Due to that, Zimbabwe plans to ban lithium concentrate exports from 2027. Do you think that is a bold move, or is it self-harm? Because we know the aim is local processing, but do local plants and even power infrastructure actually exist at scale to make that work?
Yeah. As I said it, what is making all this thing happening is because of our divided front. If SADC rise up, if they impose sanctions on Zimbabwe and SADC, all the member states in Southern Africa come together and said, this thing, we will not allow it, it won't work. And so, but because it is something that they put in, and Zimbabweans are suffering, South Africans might think that, well, that's not the case. And Namibia will say that's not the case. And that is why all these things are happening. If we come together, whatever attack, like the NATO principle, an attack on one NATO member is an attack on the other. And that is the same principle we must be invoking. An attack on one Southern African country, Zimbabwe, become an attack on South Africa, an attack on South Africa, Zimbabwe will take it up. All these countries in the SADC country, Namibia, all of them will stand up and say that no, an attack of one member, we will not allow it. This is the principle that we have not used, and that is why we're having, when you come to West Africa, you see that ECOWAS, they don't speak one voice. Sometimes we think that the French people, the English people, we are not united, and that is why all these things are happening. If we speak one voice, we stand up on a member state, and all of us will come together. Then you realize that at a point that the global north will no longer use sanctions as a tool, because it will never work, and Africans will rise up and they'll kick it out. Okay. What I will maintain is that we need this unity, a united voice, come together as Africa and speak one voice, whether as a regional or continental. We need that, and to be able to put an end to all this unnecessary sanctions that are imposed on our leaders.
All right, thank you, Prof. So we'll have to take a break now. When we come back, we'll continue this discussion. Stay with us. Welcome back, and thank you for staying with us. We're talking about sanctions and how they're used as weapons, in Africa mostly. And we still have Dr. Matsanga and also Professor Kipo-Sunyehzi here with us to speak on this. Now let's come to you, Dr. Matsanga. Now, speaking of these sanctions, do they push African states into new geopolitical hedges? For example, do they push them closer to, deals with China, Russia, or even regional blocs? And if so, what does that mean for long-term governance and standards, or even leverage?
First of all, I agree with the professor about unity. Unity of purpose in Africa is not there. We are not united. We are the most caste people. I don't know what caste us. The more we pretend to unite, the more we divide ourselves. The more we sign protocols, the more we even leave them with ink before the ink dries, we abandon them. Look at all the elephants in the house. We have plenty. We have signed the African Court of Human Rights here in Banjul, where I am looking for some people who have not endorsed the court. You know, I don't want to go to that subject. I thank Ghana, where Professor comes from. You have endorsed this court. Very good. Continue doing that. But look at the way people in Africa, we have several protocols, my sister. We have Malabo Protocol, Maputo Protocol, Kampala Protocol, Addis Ababa Protocol. Oh my God. These protocols are on paper. We don't have any voice. ECOWAS came closer to having a voice. But ECOWAS is again funded by a power that does not want them to unite. France does divide ECOWAS every day. SADC came together. Again, SADC has a problem. They don't have their own money. They rely on handouts, again from abroad. UAE. You find some of these guys not even well equipped to know where River Nile or where River Niger is or where River Congo is, coming to Africa to tell African leaders, no, 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 we are not. The worst problem we have, my sister and the professor, is African Union. Okay. We have been captured. It's dead. And I have to be very honest with you. My professor will agree with me that maybe we go back to the graves and carry out Nkuruma and carry out Nyerere and rise up Jomo Kenyatta and rise up Sekou Amir Kaburo, Nasser, Gabriel Nasser, Abraham Selassie, and tell them, please come back, come back. The African Union is dead. It's dead. It is captured. Do you know about it anywhere in your place? How many people in Africa know that there is an African Union Security Committee? Nobody.
Okay.
We haven't done anything much. So the enemy of sanctions, those who bring sanctions, come in, bring their own institution. For example, the ICC was created because the African Court, which was created in Banjul and Arusha, don't work. There you are, Professor, you know that. Then they brought in ICC to capture us, to capture only us. They can't capture Tony Blair. They can't capture George Bush for having invaded Iraq and killed people, for having destroyed Sarkozy. I had to follow Sarkozy who destroyed Libya, and I put him down for 5 years. I followed him. They can't capture. They cannot come together. African Union is the mess.
All right, Dr. Matsanga, let's wind up with Dr. Kipo-Sunyehzi. You know, let's find out from you. He talked about African Union and all that, but then which of the African-led approaches are actually delivering at the moment? Mediation, AU, ECOWAS frameworks, or resource-sharing deals? Which one, and where have we seen more success? In 1 minute, please, so we round up.
I think, as we said it, Africa is a bright continent. All that we need is to go back to our founding fathers, the visions of the Nkrumah, a united Africa, one government, one currency. We need this voice, this institution that we will rely on. If African Union is where we are given our power, we need to give it the resources. Member states must be loyal, contribute their dues to make AU self-sufficient, to make AU being able to run by our own Africans. Then we can speak. We must fund so that we can speak with one voice. We do not only talk about talking, we African states must support their own institutions and let them speak for them. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, for your time and for speaking on this. We've had the pleasure of Dr. David Matsanga, African Affairs Analyst, and Professor Daniel Kipo-Sunyehzi, Senior Research Fellow, Legon Centre for International Affairs and Diplomacy, University of Ghana. Thank you once again.